We are kicking off our first session today of the Cherry Becker 2024 Strategic Financing Services Speaker Series. The series will focus on a set of unique skills that you might want to hone and polish over the summer with us. So we are focusing on new market tax credits and other grant funding programs that we can help you with accessing through a variety of means. The first section today will be on demystifying the grant writing process. We'll have another upcoming session on how to get capital financing for your projects, and we'll have other sessions along the way over the summer. We're offering it as a monthly series in hopes that you'll be able to find this a regular touch point to hone your skills and find the resources you need, but not take too much time out of your day. All of these will be free of charge, and you will be able to get CPE credit, as the announcement mentioned, if you answer all the polling questions across the session. We have a bonus polling question today, so you have an opportunity to get all of your CPE credits. And I'm pleased to announce that we also have on with me today Lauren Kilborn, our New Market Applications Manager at Cherry Becker. Lauren, did you want to say hi to everybody?
Everybody. I'm excited to see so many people are interested in learning more about best practices for writing grants and how best to apply that to the New Markets Tax Credit Program. So hopefully, if you are a seasoned grant professional or just getting into this practice, we hope that everybody walks away today with learning some new tips and some skills.
Thanks. We'll get started by telling you all a little bit about our learning objectives for today. So it's more of a generalized demystifying the grant writing process session. We'll talk about how to define your success, tell your story by both aligning your metrics and your passion along the way, so narrative and data. We'll talk about understanding the financial considerations of cost benefit of each funding source. There's always strings. You have to check whether those strings are going to pull you up or pull you down. So that's an important step of the process. We'll also discuss the use of internal and external resources to pull together your project team. And there'll be some bonus sessions in the middle for decoding the new market tax credit application in particular. So if you're here for other resources, no worries. We'll have plenty of general tips for you. But if you're here to understand a little bit more about the new market tax credit application in particular, we'll have a few resources for you there as well. So the first part of our discussion today will be about defining success. So defining success really is basically a four-part session of what are the various pieces of that puzzle. Success is not just you find a funding source and you mad dash rush to submit. You have to think about it as far as what is your mission, vision, values? How do you put the project together? Are you seeking funding because you have a particular project in mind, or is this funding something that is more of thinking about your goals? Are you thinking about, I have a mission to grow, and so I want to serve more people, and so you're finding a funding source that allows you to grow within that mission? So thinking about whether this is part of a government initiative that you're interacting with different people and you want to try to find a resource to meet a particular need. Are you part of a public-private partnership trying to get particular resources into a community? Is there a community? Are you part of a community-driven organization and you are have an idea in mind of what would make your community a better place? So thinking about who's around the table, and frankly, not just who is around the table, but who should be around the table. If it is not just about you as a solo organization, who else should you bring to the table to make sure you're meeting the community's needs? The next part of that is really thinking about the scope. Is it something that you can take on with the resources you have in 1 year, or is it a multiple year endeavor? Is it something that's actually too small to really work? So should you pair it with other things? Thinking about whether you're taking on something too big or too small, or whether it's just the right size. That really leads you into thinking about how much does that cost. Knowing whether it's too big or too small really talks about whether the funding source is something. For example, for new market tax credits, if you're really going for a very small project, New Markets is not a particularly flexible funding tool for very small projects. There are some small business loans that are able to be taken for New Markets. And so there are a couple of CDEs that have done that as one of their products. But for the general industry as a whole, new markets are generally something that you use when you have maybe a $5 to $7 million project at the lowest end. So really thinking about what are the budget and capital needs for your project. What do you think is important to cover in the particular phase you're going for? And how does that funding source really match in with other pieces of the puzzle? And then think about timing. So is it the right time? I often get asked right before an application season gets open, can I just apply? And the answer is often, unfortunately, that's not the right timing. If you haven't done the legwork and you haven't built your foundation, it's not necessarily the right time to just go because that season has opened. But if it's a seasonal grant program, similar to New Markets, where that's an annual process, think about it for next year. Think about what do you need to do to lay the foundation so you're ready for the next time that this funding source comes out. All of these are pillars of your project, but in essence, it's really actually more of a fluid assessment, thinking about what all the different pieces are that go together. So thinking about if you have the bulk of what you need for that particular funding source, is that a really good funding source you should start with, or is that really not laying the foundation? But it's a really much more fluid design of who's on your team, do you have enough people to get started, and what are the pieces of the puzzle that make you the most competitive for each particular grant that you're looking for, and thinking about it as that competitive process. If you are going to spend the time, which that's important, time is valuable. If you're going to spend the time to apply for something, are you putting your best foot forward, and do you have a really reasonable chance that you might succeed in your grant ask? So that really goes to talking about that last part, is once you think you've got something, are you really ready? So if we can go to talking about what is the common element in evaluating readiness. And really it's that fluid determination that your plan aligns, you've got the people that you need to start your process. Have you got the diligence? If there's a prerequisite for funding, so for example, the new market tax credits is a good one. If you are not a CDE that is certified, if you're a CDFI that has to do a recertification and you are not in compliance, if you have that diligence item that is not complete by the funding date that's required in the notice of allocation availability or whatever other funding availability memo, then you know right then you have not met your criteria. So is your project ready? Are you ready? Do you have the other funding sources committed? So capital magnet funding, you have to have some other sources around the table in order to be successful at going for that kind of funding source. Have you secured all those funding commitments in order to move forward? The last thing to think about in that, defining success in that last piece of the puzzle is really, what are the risks? What happens if you don't do what you're asking for? Sometimes people say nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'm just going to throw it against the wall and see what sticks like spaghetti. But there's an opportunity cost. So again, if you have a limited resources of people, internal capacity, money, and you go for funding of something that you don't have a reasonable chance of succeeding for, you may be just wasting your time and money, and you may actually dishearten your people. And if you are having a board that has to approve different things, if you don't have a reasonable chance for success, will they approve you spending the money the next year? And if you wait 1 year, will they be happier with the return on that investment? So really thinking about it, whether it's an all or nothing. Hey, it's the one time this is going to happen. ARPA funds come to mind. Like, get in line, everybody. There's money to be had, and if you don't do it now, it's not going to come back. Or is it a regular funding cycle, and are you ready for that funding cycle? So I on purpose did the beginning of this session before we had our first polling question, because I know that sometimes people are struggling with technology to get it all set up. So the first polling question is now, and it is, what do you hope to get from your time with us today? So are you here really to talk about new market debriefs and insights? Are you looking for just generalized best practices and brainstorming? Looking for tips and tools for a particular grant, or are you here for CPE or some other reason? So feel free to answer that polling question if you would. And then when people have had sufficient time to answer, we will show the results of that. And are there any questions we should ask? I don't think that there is a problem with the sound, but if other people are having a problem with sound, please put that in the chat. And then anybody who has specific questions about the New Market Tax Credit Program or seeking insights, will feel free to follow up with you after the presentation today.
All right, thank you, Laurel. So we do have most of our poll responses in. If you have not submitted yours, I see there's a couple still. Go ahead and pick one of the options, and we will close the poll in a few seconds.
Great. We will be getting going again in a second, and Lauren will be taking the next section after we go through the site. So it looks like we've got a fairly good number of people who are here for CPE credit, and we're glad that you joined us. But the second highest group is people here for best practices and brainstorming. So we will hope to meet your needs there, and then new market tax credit debrief. So we have a couple of particular slides on that topic in particular. So we'll get going again. And Lauren will take it from here for the next section.
Great. Thank you, Laurel. So I will be discussing today some more general grant writing best practices, and in essence, really how to make your story stand out in a really competitive landscape. We all know that grant funding is very limited, very competitive, and so anything that you can do to give yourself that leg up and tell your story in the best way possible will hopefully increase your chances of receiving that funding that you need. So as we talk about best practices in the grant writing world, we're really kind of focusing on 4 kind of key areas. Building the foundation of your organization. So what resources do you have both internally and externally to be able to take on this source of funding or to execute your project or run your program? What type of organizational framework do you have in place? What systems, what policies and procedures, what staff, what partners? Do you have all of those correct tools that you need for both that front end, that sort of pre-award work, as well as being able to execute your project and then conduct all the necessary reporting and grants management side of that process? What is your ability to gather the data that you need, both again, sort of that pre-award side as you talk about the needs and challenges of your community, and then also what data are you going to be collecting to show that your project, your program is actually effective, that you are being a responsible steward of your grant funds and making the impact that you set out to do. And then lastly, what is your capital raising strategy in all of this? So as we know, one source from a grant is unlikely to fund your entire project. So what other financial resources or staff resources do you need to be able to execute that project successfully? I think the biggest thing we think about as grant is just, well, I need the money for my project, right? So defining success is likely getting the funds that you need to complete your project or to operate your program. But we really have to start kind of pulling the reins back in and sort of taking this inventory, if you could say, of this particular grant opportunity that you're assessing. So making a list, understanding all of the required elements of the application, what covenants and promises will you be making by pursuing and receiving these grant funds? Understanding, like Laurel mentioned earlier, if there are any of those sort of like threshold eligibility things that you and your organization need to consider, that all of those are taken care of before you start sinking any time at all into, this big project. Ensuring that you're gathering all available resources. So making sure that you're bringing all of the right people together to the table to discuss this opportunity. Your frontline staff, your sort of boots on the ground, your financial staff of your organization, the folks who will be responsible for reporting and evaluation, perhaps even depending on the type of project, maybe a little bit earlier, engaging with some like third-party consultants or contractors to figure out what does my team need to look like in order to execute this project. And then once you have an idea of sort of being able to chart your path forward, that's when we start getting into the nitty-gritty of the writing of the content, and really being able to successfully balance your narrative responses with data to help you tell the most compelling story about why you are uniquely qualified to be able to undertake this project successfully. And ideally, in a perfect world, you know, when you execute all of that pre-award due diligence items, you set your plan, you have a path forward, you write a great application, then hopefully you get the funding that you need to complete your project and be able to impact your community in the best way possible. So in general, whether you're looking at a new markets tax credit application or another CDFI world application, state, federal, local, philanthropic, you're more than likely going to have to address 4 key areas. You'll have to describe, you know, very clearly your need. What is your need statement? This is the reason that you are acting, that you are pursuing this grant funding. So being able to clearly address what the problem is, how you know it's a problem, what data are you using to actually verify that, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and also how are you uniquely qualified to be able to address that need in your community. And then we'll move on to methods and metrics. So the methods are these activities that are producing your desired outcomes. Those specific activities, who's involved, who's doing what those roles and responsibilities look like. And then being able to really clearly describe what the benefits will be. And we'll talk a little bit more about, you know, metrics and being able to measure and evaluate your success, but being able to state who will benefit, when will they benefit, how many people will benefit, and how will they, by how much will their lives improve, or, you know, will they be given expanded access to something? So all of that is very unique to your particular project or program. You'll have to show the funder that you have the capacity, both in terms of staffing and, you know, your financials, to be able to undertake this grant in more of like a long-term way. You know, a funder's not going to give you a grant if they think that your organization is going to dissolve in, you know, a year or two. So making sure that you are able to express the using this as a time to consider, you know, do you need to bring in additional resources, maybe consultants, you know, additional staff, any stakeholders that are maybe involved in the project as well. So if you're working, you know, with a partner organization on this too, being able to show your funder that you are qualified to be able to undertake this work and that you understand all the responsibilities that accompany that. Ensuring that you have sound policies and procedures in place to be able to manage your grant funds is extraordinarily important. And then I always think this is helpful. Do you have any grant experience on your team? So I think a lot of times it ends up being one person is sort of tasked with writing the grant application or voluntold to do so. Not everybody is fortunate enough to have a designated grant writer on their team. So ensuring that you are assembling the most qualified, experienced team possible to be able to write your story effectively. And then lastly, your budget. So ensuring that your proposed budget is actually reasonable. It is relevant to the project that you're trying to undertake. These are allowable or eligible expenses that you are proposing, and that these are expenses that can be documented, that you can provide evidence to your funder that you are using them in the way that you intended to. I'd say matching funds is one of the things that I would look at like first on sort of that kind of threshold eligibility thing. You know, depending on the requirement of matching funds, that can sometimes be a disqualifier for some smaller organizations and particularly nonprofits who maybe don't have, you know, as many other sources of funds coming in. So ensuring that you have the additional financial resources needed to be able to leverage into your project or your program to show your funder that you are also financially committed to seeing this through. And then lastly, ensuring that you're involving all key staff in the discussion and preparation of your budget. So making sure that the people who need to be in that room are aware that you're applying for your grant. So make sure that your financial, you know, team is aware that you're even applying for these funds, involve them in the conversation surrounding matching funds, and that they will also be aware of all of the reporting requirements that would come from those grant funds. Okay, so to decide who should even be the applicant. So most people are going to go in and be like, well, it's my organization is the one that's actually applying for these grant funds, but we really need to be able to assess your baseline eligibility for that funding and your capacity to be the lead applicant on some of these. Now, not every grant program is going to allow you to, formally partner with another entity. There might be some more informal partnerships, so they'll want to get a feel for sort of where you fit in your ecosystem within your community. But for other folks, I think for a lot of like philanthropic grants, you see that, maybe you have to be a 501c3 nonprofit to be able to, even apply. That might kick a lot of folks out of the running, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, what activities you're proposing to do with the grant are, not worthy of the funding. So maybe you just broaden your viewpoint a little bit more and consider who else can I bring to the table? How can we leverage each other's experience and capacity and even just entity status to make our project come to fruition? And maybe that means more of a regional approach, expanding and growing your project to bring more people to the table. And then lastly, just considering, is this the right funding source for you? So, grants are not a no strings attached source of funding. There's a lot of commitments that you're making. And you have to just kind of pump the brakes a little bit and make sure that you're not drifting away from your mission just to chase a dollar, right? So making sure that you have the capacity to undertake this project, it makes sense with your mission. And ideally, your organization has been planning in advance for pursuing additional sources of funding to sustain your operations and grow your program. So hopefully, this isn't just a last minute decision to jump on something. Just being very thoughtful about, where you're spending your time and your resources. So every grant application is going to have space for you to introduce yourself as the applicant. And it really serves two key purposes. One, just describing and introducing your organization to a reviewer that more than likely has no idea who you are or what you do and who you serve. And then second, establishing that credibility. So you want the reviewer to, kind of feel the warm and fuzzies about you, right? That you're doing great work in your community, that you are already doing XYZ. And so therefore you are qualified to be able to undertake this grant because, this is near and dear to our hearts. This is true to our mission. This is what we do. And that description, of course, will vary based on the funder and the type of request, but, you'll be asked about your mission, perhaps your vision and your values. So again, sort of that threshold eligibility thing, making sure that you and your organization have a documented mission statement. What is it that you are actually trying to achieve? And how does that guide you through your funding decisions? You might get a chance to talk about the history of your organization, how you started, how you have grown over time, talking about your service area and those unique needs and challenges, the programs and the services that you provide, and talking a little bit more about the populations that you serve. So I see this new markets land to really connect to the executive summary, which is not a scored portion of the application, but this is the moment where if a reviewer is going to be reading this, you want them to be nodding their head and really understanding who you are and what your role is in the new markets industry and the ecosystem, and ensuring that, all of your products and your services are really aligning with your mission and your investment strategy. Okay, so defining the problem. The problem is the reason for your grant proposal, right? So this is your motivation. What is motivating you to act? Who or what is being affected by this defined problem? How are they affected? What is the magnitude of that impact? Is this something that is, maybe not super duper important in your community? Or is this something that is very much, very important to address, kind of like basic needs in your community? What is the significance and what are the causes of this problem? So really being able to dig down and try to find the root and being able to express that very, very clearly and effectively. Ideally, when you're defining the problem, you would be able to leverage both qualitative and quantitative data. So taking an inventory of what data resources you have available to you, whether that is, hard data from the census, or, there's so many other sources available, or maybe it's qualitative where you are doing focus groups and surveys and getting a feel for the residents in your community and how they are experiencing this problem and what their needs are. And then in defining the problem, you also really need to be able to focus on the beneficiaries. So it's one thing to say, well, our community needs more affordable rental housing. But we want to be able to say is that, the residents of our community need affordable rental housing because, so much of our population is housing cost burdened, or we understand that not having safe and affordable quality housing can impact your employment and education, right? And then lastly, making sure that the problem is aligned with your mission, right? It makes sense for you to be able to, pursue this and try to address it. And that scope is also within your capacity. And if it's not within your sole capacity, do you have qualified partners identified who are ready and available and have given you that buy-in and commitment to assist you with addressing that community need? So again, how do you even know that the problem or need that you've identified is actually present in your community? A lot of ways to do that, both quantitative and qualitatively. So perhaps you're doing surveys in your community or conducting focus groups with key stakeholders, whether that are leaders of organizations, governmental officials, faith-based organizations, and convening all of your partners, like we talked about. Who else is active in this ecosystem and what perspective can they offer you? What are they seeing in the community and the people that they serve? And then being able to leverage all of that, qualitative information with more hard data to be able to support that even more. So all that to be said is you're leveraging all these sources of data to identify and really concretely, measure the community need or challenges. And then also sort of during this exploration period, figuring out, does your community believe this is a problem? Is this an issue that the community is willing to rally behind you? So ensuring that you do have that community and stakeholder buy-in is really important. And then also assessing who's already working on finding a solution to this project. So not trying to reinvent the wheel, but leveraging your partners, other organizations so that you all can combine your resources and hopefully tackle this problem much more effectively than if you were just trying to do it alone. Determining outcomes. So our outcomes are really metrics for success. It's how we know we're going to be making progress towards our established goals and objectives. So we have to set those up front to know if we are, improving people's quality of life. Being able to establish your baseline and then measure that against your anticipated change for evaluation purposes. I think most people have heard this before, that outcomes are SMART, the acronym. Outcomes are specific, they are measurable, attainable, reasonable, and time-bound, right? Outcomes can be distilled down to just a single sentence in a majority of cases. And in that sentence, it will be able to define who or what will change, how many people change or, lives improved, by how much, what type of change, and when. So it can really almost be, just like the briefest summary of your project essentially down in this outcome statement. Right, we have our second polling question of the session today. So we would love to know, how do you currently evaluate community needs? Perhaps you are very much, a boots on the ground organization. So you are all about your qualitative data collection. You love focus groups, you love surveys, you love getting out there and talking to people door to door. Perhaps your organization, was relying more on quantitative data collection. Maybe you do that yourself as an organization, or perhaps you're relying on third-party sources of information, census data, community needs assessments conducted by partner organizations and the like. Maybe you're an organization that leverages both types of data, both qualitative and quantitative. If so, go you. And then the last option is we don't collect any data. And hopefully this session has, kind of got the wheels turning a little bit. So you think about, what is it that we're missing out on by not collecting any of this data or talking to folks to be able to figure out, how are we even going to decide that this is a need? How are we going to even assess that we are able to improve those circumstances for people?
Maddie, do we have enough people answering? We can move on now.
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll right now, and we will keep
Awesome.
moving.
This is great. 3% of our attendees collect both quantitative and qualitative data. That's great. And about 25% say we don't collect any data. But like I said, I hope you're thinking about what you're going to take back to your organization today. Just briefly touching on methods. So these are, like I said earlier, the activities that are producing your outcomes, being able to clearly define what type of activity it is. This is, again, really dependent on sort of the subject matter of the grant, but if you're able to root it in, evidence-based practices or, generally accepted best practices, which just kind of provides that credibility to your method. Being able to define, who is going to participate, and then ultimately who will benefit. And maybe those numbers and populations don't always necessarily, equal each other. What resources are needed to be able to, conduct your activities effectively, not just financially, but also staff, what facilities are needed, what equipment is needed, what supplies. That will harken back to the preparation of your budget. Being able to clearly define your timeline and your work plan. So many funders might request a work plan or a similar document, but even if it's not required, I still think it's a really helpful tool for laying out all the key elements, the timing, the responsibilities of your grant proposal, and being a, sort of a convening document where everybody can come back to and you can kind of, see where you are in charting your course towards your project or your grant proposal. It should align with your budget. And then lastly, that method should also describe the responsibilities of your partner organization if you have one. Community outcomes. So just to circle this back to the New Markets Tax Credit Program, these are some commonly used outcomes in the new markets industry. And we would typically see, these documented in a community benefits agreement once a transaction is closing. But not every project, outside of new markets is going to have these set in stone. And, they might sometimes be in flux. So how will you know that you're even producing the outcomes that you originally targeted? So you have to establish your baseline, continue to evaluate your progress towards meeting those goals and objectives, and then pausing and deciding what, if anything, needs to be reevaluated. Perhaps your scope is too large. Perhaps you don't have the right staff in place to be able to undertake this. Perhaps you need more financial resources to be able to, achieve your desired outcomes. Again, touched a little bit on evaluation here. How are you actually going to track and measure your results? And it's really important up front to decide who is going to be responsible for collecting your data, preparing reports, what data is needed for reporting purposes. Do you have the right software or technology to be able to collect that data accurately and ideally in an unduplicated manner? Being able to assess what your baseline is so that you can show measured growth or progress over time. And then being able to, understand the cadence or the frequency of your data collection, how it's collected, who's collecting it, who is receiving those reports is really important too. So understanding, who your main point of contact is with your funder, and then understanding any additional reporting that might be required. Perhaps you have financial reporting or audits that need to be submitted as part of your progress or, program reports. And is there any closeout reporting that's needed? So ensuring that you are maintaining compliance throughout the entire life cycle of the grant, just sort of on that compliance level, but then also making sure that your program or your project is actually producing the results that you set out to achieve in the first place. So ideally, you're bringing together all of these different grant elements so that you can tell your story most effectively. You're marrying your data, you're telling your story effectively so that you can persuade the reader or reviewer that you are the most uniquely qualified organization to be able to address this problem, that you are deserving of these funds to complete your project, run your program, and that you'll be responsible in doing so, right? So you want the reviewer to be nodding their head along the whole way that they're reading about you and being like, yes, building that trust, that credibility is really important when preparing your application. So ideally, you get your grant funding, and the result is that you are filling a funding gap that you have addressed for your project or your program, that you have successfully balanced both your internal resources, staff and financial, and any external resources, leveraging additional sources of funds to show that you are financially committed to seeing this through. Your community is invested as well. You are bringing together the voices of your community so that they can provide their perspective and their buy-in. And then lastly, ideally, you'll be funding a project that has that significant community impact, that is addressing that need that you defined at the beginning stages of preparing your grant application. Hey, Laurel.
Great. So now that we have worked on defining sort of who the applicant is and the best practices, let's dig deeper into the money, because grant writing is all about trying to get your needs met and making sure that you have the budget to do that. So how does the grant work for your organization? Numbers usually tell the story, and so you know what you're asking for, but are you actually going to get enough money to meet the needs that you're trying to meet? Are you needing to get some other grant sources as well to make sure that you're meeting all of your needs? Do you have to hire other people? Lauren mentioned quite a good list of methods, metrics, and evaluation. Do you have the capacity internally to do all of that, or do you now need to go and hire somebody either to add to your staff full-time or an external resource that can help you with doing that reporting? So have you thought of all of the costs? Are there some hidden costs along the way? So in order to really assess all those things, we've got to look at a budget. We've got to really look at who pays for what. So again, Lauren mentioned who's the right applicant. So if you have identified a need and it's a need you really feel passionate about, but you're working with other people, making it clear who's going to pay what costs and whether they'll come from the grant sources or other sources. And if they need to come from operational, do people have that funding already, or do they need to seek that funding? Are there other things that are as sort of a prerequisite to getting that going? So it's unlikely that you're ever going to cover all of your costs with your budget. There are a lot of things that you have to look at in the budget line items. And frankly, it's really helpful sometimes to get an outside audit when you're looking at what line items can be included in your budget. So looking at whether personnel, equipment, supplies, training, travel, contract professional services, whether those can be included inside or outside of your budget is really helpful. And sometimes getting a second look or an audit of that budget will be helpful to you to understand if you're leaving some eligible costs on the table. So on occasion, when you're going through your budget, you'll find that you may have a little bit of money left over, but you don't really know whether you can use it for one thing or another. So getting outside help can help you determine whether you have a source that you can use on a cost that you weren't expecting, especially when you have some money left over at the end of a grant cycle and the money's going to go back to the government if you don't spend it. For most new market tax credit purposes, this is not an issue. You have an eligible use of your allocation and you've already set up front what you're going to use your allocation on, what your fees will be, and other types of upfront costs and ongoing costs. But for other types of grant programs, sometimes you will have a more flexible use of funds over the life. So balancing all of these factors is really how you underwrite your risks and rewards at the beginning, thinking about are your partners reliable? If you're counting on somebody to do a big key component of your grant service provision or your reporting or something along those lines, have you really vetted their capacity to do that? If there's construction or operational costs, do you have the people on the team? If you are a nonprofit and you've never had a building or construction before, do you have the right resources and team around you to make sure that you don't get the funds and then not be able to complete the building or what other construction you're looking for? Another thing to think really through is sustainability. So if you get a one-time fund and it allows you to hire a new staff, for example, but you don't think about what's going to happen in a year, and then you don't build your capacity internally in order to cover the cost of that staff person, do you have the staff person you now have to fire in a year? Is it a better system, perhaps, in that scenario where you don't have a sustainable fund to get an outside contractor or a part-time person to fill that role for a short period of time so that you're really building that team collaboratively and collectively, and you're not, hiring somebody and then having to let them go? This is also a really important thing for funders. Sometimes funders want to know that you're going to produce a result, but it's not going to just be a blip on the screen. It's not going to be a one-time thing. We're going to get a bunch of people checked for something, and then next year we're going to have no money for that, and we're not going to keep that process and that work going up. I think about health outcomes, and I think about the charge to try to bring down A1C levels or to help alleviate heart disease or other things. So are we going to do something that's going to long-term impact the community that we're working in, or are we just having a source of funds for a short period of time? And frankly, thinking about the leadership of this. So leadership to sort of bring all of these pieces to the puzzle, not just internally, but externally. If you're working with government, what is, if you have a support system within the regional economic development office, or you have somebody at the mayor's office, how long are they going to be there? And are they going to be able to champion your work for a long period of time, or are they just going to be in and out of that seat, and then you're going to be starting the work all over? It doesn't mean you don't tackle the certain, things on your agenda. It just means you need to look at who will fill that gap and how you can meet those needs in the future. And then as a lawyer by training, I don't practice law anymore, but I had to mention, it's great when we work in community and we all think about the wonderful work we're going to do and we want to trust our partners, but it's good to also write it down. One, for just making sure we're sharing it with the team. If we have it written down, people can read what's supposed to be done and know what's on their list to do. Second, also, again, if leadership changes and you've written it down, at least there's a continuity of what people expect from each group. Also, holding people accountable and saying, I can't do my part without you doing your part, and making it clear what's written down is helpful. So we're now to our next polling question. Polling question number 3. So you've got to answer, as we said, I think 3 out of 4, but we actually have a bonus. So this is the third question. Grant writing needs. Which statement reflects your organization? Are you a new organization? Are you an organization that's been here for a long time? So I will let you read these because I don't want to read over your thinking faster or slower. But tell us who you are and where you are in your process, please. And do we have any questions that we need to address while the polling is happening? I don't see any Q&A that's not answered. As we've said in the past, you can either send a question for us to answer, and if we can't answer it during our time with you today, we will definitely follow up with you afterwards. And if you have a chat or anything else you want to let us know, please feel free to do that as well. I think we probably have given people enough time. We have enough reporting that we can close the poll. Great. So a lot of people are in that other category. So feel free to send us a chat or a note. Where are you? If you're not new, but you're not lacking seed capital and you're not in any of these categories, tell us where you are. Feel free to let us know that. So assuming that you've got the applicants together and you've got a team, What if you've got a need that you've identified, but you don't know how to fund your need? So you have identified a need in your community, you have everybody together on your team, you know that if you could just get the right resources, you could ameliorate the needs of your community. I think about healthcare again, because there's so many healthcare needs that are unmet because we don't have the money to tackle all of those. But how do you find the money to tackle the outcomes that are working, that you're needing to work towards? If it's part of your 5-year plan, how do you find the sources of funds? So some of these are geographically specific. So there's economic development offices. If you're focused on healthcare, there's HRSA. If you are focused on financial literacy or needs of the financing community, there's the community development financial institutions. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And you can, Google is a way to start, but there's some defined sources that are helpful for people to really look through. And so grants.gov lists a lot of things. The Federal Register. You can subscribe to any of the data systems that the federal government have if there's a funding source regularly. So there's a lot of ways for you to go about trying to find that. And also there are people in the community that have gotten really good at that. So if you don't know how to find that source of fund, reach out and find somebody who has experience in this area, because they may know of a hidden gem for you to meet your needs. What are some of the sources of capital? So if you're new to this space, or you've been in a space, but you're trying to broaden your horizons, what are some of the places you can go? So sources of capital include things like new market tax credits, which we've talked about. Some of you may be here to talk about that in particular, and some of you, that may be the first time you're thinking about that. If you provide funding in low-income communities and you are a CDE or a CDFI, you can access the New Market Tax Credit Program by submitting an application on their annual funding cycle. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide coming up. But there's a bunch of other ways that you can meet that need. The CDFI has other programs. So financial assistance, technical assistance, community capital magnet funding. There are NACA grants and other things. So I'm not trying to talk in acronyms, but there's a lot of different types of funding available to meet your needs. So depending on where you are and what type of program you're trying to put on, if you're having healthy food as the issue you're trying to address, there's healthy food funding out there specifically geared towards that. So partnering with people in the industry to know what available resources are out there would be helpful to you if you don't know. And then we'll move on to talk about, in particular, for the new market tax credit application, it's not just what have you done in the new market industry, and sometimes it's what you're doing elsewhere and what other things you're doing. So it's your track record over the last 5 years of raising capital and meeting the needs of the community, both in equity, grants, and below market loans. So you can be an organization that is meeting these needs. If you've never worked with new market tax credits, looking at your 5-year track record, you can decide whether you're competitive to seek that additional funding source. But it's not for brand new organizations, because you do need to have a track record in order to be competitive. And new markets in particular, if you haven't done this for a long period of time, and so you haven't necessarily deployed new markets, you may have to go out and get debt and equity investor relationships, and you may have to get funding letters of support in order to be competitive as well. And then really, there's some other things. These are really talking about how your application will be looked at by the CDFI fund. And you have to really talk about how you have used your capital in the past. What benefits are you producing for both your organization as a community development or CDFI, and the qualifier and the investor in these types of investments? Who's benefiting and to what level? Are we sharing those benefits around the table, or is one organization getting the majority of the benefits and we're not leaving those in the low-income community? We've got so much to say. I think we're going to move right on and talk about the building the team and internal and external resources. One of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is it can be quite an undertaking. Who's the applicant? Who controls the money? How many levers to pull? And how do we work side by side? When you look around the table, if you don't have all the resources there are organizations that will be out there in the community that will help you fill your needs. So if you cannot, if you can do all of the scoping and the sourcing of your pipeline, but you don't have the compliance team, you can look for somebody to help you with those But really, it's about thinking about who needs to do all the different roles, and do you have both the money to do those, and do you have the capacity, the human capital capacity to meet all those. Thinking about who's on the team is also about the different funding sources. So if the funding comes from a government agency, there may need to be a government organization involved in your team. If there is really a need to marry both public and private funding sources, so the government funding requires you to have a private leverage, then you'll need to have some other people on your team, and you can't just go it alone with the government agency. Oftentimes, foundations and nonprofits are at the middle of our struggle and our thought about what we're trying to get money for, but oftentimes they can't go it alone. They need to get industry or other financial organizations or government involved. Thinking about utilities. So that's a hidden place for some money in low-income communities, because there's a lot of things that need to get done. Can you find a grant from a utility company to meet the needs for sustainability, especially environmental sustainability within your local community? And are there other local agencies or businesses that really would find that your mission aligns with their mission and you could work together? Another place to hover a little bit over new market tax credits is thinking about the capacity. So again, your organization may be wonderful at working in community, but if you don't have that management capacity to show that you know how to underwrite in that financial way, if you've maybe not done compliance on the scale that's necessary for new market tax credits, if you don't have the systems or procedures in place. So for example, you don't have policies, procedures, and underwriting memo or some things like that, you may need to get external help in order to be competitive for your first round of application. And some organizations find that partnering with another group to do that is actually more cost effective, because there's a lot of different skill sets that are involved in compliance. And we will have a CDE best practices session later in the summer. For those of you that are here looking at new markets in particular, please feel free to join us for that session. So I won't spend too much more time on that. But Lauren, did you have anything you wanted to add to the management capacity section real quick before we move on?
I think that's great, as we're winding down on time here, so we can push forward to polling question.
Question 4. Great. What is your organization's greatest area of need? Do you need help finding those grants? You know what you want, but you don't know where the money is. Do you have the idea of where your grant is coming from, but you don't have the capacity to write a compelling grant? Do you have the capacity to maybe need capacity managing and reporting, or is there something else? And again, if you have that D selection and you have something else as your answer, feel free to send us a chat and we'd be happy to continue the conversation after we're done with our session today. And since we are rolling up on our time at the end, if we've got enough reporting on this one, I think we'll close it out to try to make sure we finish up, because we don't want to leave the decoding of the new market debrief off the table.
Yep, sure thing. Closing out our poll right now.
Thanks, everyone. So for those of you who are here, we'll take a note of where you mentioned you were needing something. And if you need some help, please feel free to reach out to us. We're going to roll on to decoding the new market tax credit debrief letter. And I will throw it over to Lauren to pick up decoding the new market brief.
Thank you, Laurel. So I think this was our second most popular answer for our first poll of the day. So thank you for waiting patiently as we saved the last 5 minutes for you all to dive a little bit more deeply into the new markets debrief. So I think if you are a first-time applicant and you are unsuccessful in the new markets program and you get your debrief letter, it's really easy to take a look at it and be like, this doesn't tell me anything. I don't know why I lost here. I don't know, where I'm losing the most points. I don't know how to improve this. But the debrief letter actually contains a lot of information. So just to kind of set the stage, the new markets application, the evaluation or review process is broken into 2 distinct phases. So during phase 1, you have 2 reviewers that are independently reviewing your application, but they're just looking at the first 2 parts of your application where you talk about your business or your investment strategy and your community outcomes. Those scores are then compared and, any discrepancies are addressed. And then that final score is accepted by a team leader who's overseeing those reviewers. In phase 2, This is your allocation recommendation review panel. So they're going a little bit deeper into just looking at parts 1 and 2. They're going to do a little bit more digging on your community development entity, making sure that you are being consistent with your previous applications, that you are maintaining compliance on not just the New Markets Tax Credit Program, but any other CDFI or Community Development Financial Institutions program that you also have an award for. They'll take a look at your track record. So it's a really a much more of a holistic view of your CDE. And then lastly, they will ensure that they're looking to target a proportion of rural allocatees or award winners that's at least equal to the proportion of rural applicants. And at least 20% of all allocation has to go to non-metro tracts. So you are in your application, you are telling the CDFI fund, yeah, I will commit, a minimum of 15%, a maximum of 30% of my allocation to go to non-metro tracts in my service area. So they're going to make sure that they are funneling that allocation to some of the, more deeply distressed areas in our communities that are often these non-metro communities. So for your scoring, you can receive up to 50 points for part 1, your business strategy, and up to 50 points for part 2, your community outcomes. However, you have to score at least 40 points in each of those sections and at least 85 points total in order to move on to phase 2 of the review. And there are 2 opportunities to receive some bonus or priority points in the application as well. So you can receive up to 5 points if you are able to illustrate a track record of serving disadvantaged businesses and communities, and 5 points for investing substantially all of your QEI proceeds into unrelated entities. If you can't commit to investing your QEI proceeds into unrelated entities, you can't win, because you need those bonus points as much as possible in order to end up in that top scoring bucket. So the debrief document is essentially pulling a lot of information from different places. It's going to pull information from the application guidance and the notes section throughout. It's going to layer in, key areas from the FAQ document to supplement those application questions as well. And there will be some other little nuggets in the debrief document that, pulling all of those 3 documents together is really important for crafting an award-winning application. So real quickly, if you look through the debrief document, you'll see the term a couple times, highly likely. And I think this is something that trips people up a lot. And I'm sure it trips up reviewers a lot as well, because it's a very subjective, term, right? So there are areas in the application where you just have to be very clear and consistent in the information that you're presenting, right? Other areas are a little bit more subjective. So you have to be really sure that you're being consistent in the information that you're presenting to the reviewer, that you're making very clear and strong connections. For example, you say, we'll be successful in providing loans to Qualic Bs because we've always provided loans to Qualic Bs, or we'll be successful in investing in non-metro projects and our manufacturing projects because we have a track record of doing so. So being able to clearly connect those dots, staying true to your investment strategy round over round, explaining any anomalies effectively, and making sure that you're reviewing the application guidance, FAQs, and a debrief document if available. So that's my quick 3 minutes on the debrief document.
Thanks, Lauren. We obviously love what we do, and we have a lot to add. So one of the things I just want to hover over at the end is that we have other resources available. So if you look online, we did a 4-part series last year. So some of the basics of new market tax credit application writing, CDE compliance, those are all available for you to watch at your leisure. We have 3 more sessions coming up. Project finance will be covered, capacity building, and CDE best practices. So I just want to end by saying thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for coming to spend some time with us. If you came for CPE, you've got it. You've got your 4 polling questions. If you've gotten 3 out of 4, you've successfully got your CPE. If you came for other reasons and we weren't able to cover them for you today, please feel free to reach out. There will be a short survey shared with you after this. We'd love to get your feedback. So if you have any thoughts on that, what we can do better, what you liked, feel free to be balanced in that. Tell us what you liked, tell us what you didn't, and we'll be trying to do a better job for you next time, as we always do. So check out our next sessions, and there will be some other resources that are available for you if you look for us online. So thanks for spending your time with us today. Thanks, Lauren,
Thank you
for sharing all you've got.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.